So if you notice in the title for this video, I don't have rapid transit versus commuter rail. And that's intentional because this video we're not going to try to make a case for whether the Sydney trains functions more as a commuter rail system or as a rapid transit system. We're not really focusing on answering that question. But what we are going to look at is what causes some stations to receive more ridership or patronage than do other stations. Before we take a closer look at station patronage, let's first look at the two main reasons, or what I feel are the two main reasons, why stations are built where they are. So here are what I feel to be the two main reasons why stations are built where they are. The first is anticipation of future ridership. The second is utilization of existing infrastructure. Let's first discuss anticipation of future ridership. Now, station patronage, remember here we're talking in terms of station entrances and exits, but more on this in a little bit. Station patronage is born out of dense concentrations of either employment, residences, or retail in very close proximity to the station. So if transit planners are trying to anticipate future ridership, they look at both an existing presence of dense clusters of employment, residences, or retail, or a planned presence of dense clusters of employment, residences, or retail. And bear in mind that often dense retail and residential clusters are actually planned around the construction of a major transit station. Now on to utilization of existing infrastructure. So what I mean by this is if there's an existing transit tunnel through the heart of a city, transit planners will think to place a station there before thinking about building another one. Or if there's an existing freight train line, transit planners will first think about locating a commuter rail line along that segment before thinking about laying down new track. Ultimately, both factors, anticipation of future ridership as well as utilization of existing infrastructure, bear weight in deciding where transit lines and railway stations are located. Unfortunately, when you try to maximize use of existing transit infrastructure, there may be a big gap between anticipated transit demand and actual transit demand, at least until retail, residential, and commercial development patterns around the station change. But this often can take many years, and it may be even more years after that until riders' transit usage patterns change in reflection of this development change. But anyway, back to the main point of this video. Let's see how all this plays out in the particular case of the Sydney Trains network. So here I've opened a visual provided by the New South Wales Government Bureau of Transport Statistics. It shows the number of entrances into a station during a 24-hour period during an average weekday in 2011. Let me zoom in here. So you can see that the busiest stations in the network are all located in Sydney's large business districts. These here are the very busiest ones: Central, Town Hall, and Wynard. They're all located in the Central Business District. I've pulled up Google Maps so you can see where the Central Business District of Sydney is located within its metropolitan region. You can see it's toward the eastern periphery of the region. But Sydney's development pattern is actually polycentric in nature, so it has multiple outlying business districts that compete with the Sydney Central Business District for employment. And the largest of these are actually to the north and northwest of the Sydney Central Business District. So here you have North Sydney, Chatswood, St. Leonard's, and to the northwest you have Parramatta. So those are the biggest business districts in the Sydney region. So you have the Sydney Central Business District, you have North Sydney, St. Leonard's, Chatswood, and Parramatta. And you can see outside of these three Central Business District stations, the other big circles are located here at North Sydney, St. Leonard's, Chatswood, and Parramatta. Remember, circle size is proportional to the number of station entrances. Now, leaving out the stations in these large employment hubs, the other stations with the highest number of entries or exits, here we've shown entries, but it applies to exits as well, are all located in very close proximity of dense, walkable retail strips. And to illustrate that, we're going to first consider Ashfield and Lewisham stations, both on the Western Main Line segment of the T2 Inner West Line. They're only 2 stations apart, yet Ashfield gets just under 11,000 entries per day, while Lewisham only gets 2160. So let's see why that is. So for further clarification, Ashfield is located here. Lewisham is located 2 stations to the east here. So you can see that they're both along this shared mainline segment of the T2 Inner West Line. It's coded in green. Here's the airport segment of that line. Here's the south segment of that line. This is the inner west segment of that line. So I pulled up a street view that puts us just outside Ashfield Station. You can see the sign for the trains here. And you can actually see the platform above there. And so let's head down Brown Street, turn on Hercules Street, and you can already see how dense the development around the station is. This place is loaded with stores, shops, restaurants of all types. Now we're going to take a trek along Liverpool Road, which is actually where the bulk of the development's located. And you can see this place is replete with Oriental restaurants because Ashfield's actually an ethno-burb. Its largest immigrant groups are Chinese and Indian, and they comprise a pretty significant chunk of the suburb's population. You can clearly see that reflected in the retail here along Liverpool Road. But just notice how dense the development is. And yeah, you can see here it gives way to single family homes, but along this stretch of Liverpool Road, and we've only gone in one direction from the station. Here's Ashfield Station here, and we've only headed west. But let's head east. And so here we're right to where we made the turn off Hercules Street onto Liverpool Road. But going along Liverpool Road, you can see some Indian businesses here, Indian Mart. But you can see this dense retail strip is pretty long and has lots of restaurants, grocery stores, and the like. So it's likely to attract a lot of foot traffic. So it shouldn't be all that surprising that Ashfield receives quite a few passengers and is one of the more patronized stations in the network. So now I've pulled up a street view just outside the Lewisham station. You can see those are the railway tracks there. The station sign, you can kind of see it in blue here. Now let's explore the area around the station. So if we go east along the railway terrace, we don't see any sort of retail. How about if we make a left here? No, we go right into single family homes. Now let's try back to the vicinity of the station. And let's try proceeding along Old Canterbury Road. So first we have to get to Old Canterbury Road. And again, you can see there is really no dense retail cluster. If you remember Ashfield, it was wall to wall with stores and pharmacies and restaurants, and that's simply not the case here. It should come as no surprise that about 5.5 times the number of passengers enter Ashfield station per day as do Lewisham station per day. Let's head in this direction, and again, no real dense cluster of businesses. So this area is not all that conducive to high transit usage. Now we're going to compare two stations along the T3 Bankstown line. First, Campsie here, which receives 7,000 station entries per day, and Hurlstone Park, which receives 1,290. There are only two stations apart, and for further clarification, here's the network map. Campsie is located here, while Hurlstone Park is located here, both on the T3 Bankstown line in orange here. And Hurlstone Park is actually closer to the central business district, but receives less ridership. And that was the same case that we saw with Ashfield and Lewisham. Ashfield was actually two stations further away from the Sydney Central Business District, yet received about 5.5 times the number of station entrances. So I've opened Google Street View to just outside the Campsie railway station. And unfortunately, we can't proceed in this direction along North Parade because Google Street View doesn't seem to allow it. But let's move one block over to Beamish Street, which is the main retail artery of Campsie. And you can see right off the bat how dense this retail cluster is. And you can see it even spills onto side streets here for a little bit, but is largely concentrated on Beamish Street here. We're gonna keep following it until it seems to give way to residential cluster or loses its density. So here you can already see it's winding down a bit. Now let's head back and then head in the other direction. Okay, now we're headed in the opposite direction. You can see there's quite a few ethnic eateries here, and that should come as no surprise because Campsie is in fact home to a large Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Arab population. And you can clearly see that reflected in the retail. And you can see this is quite a long stretch of very, very dense retail here. It's actually longer than the stretch we saw in Ashfield. Let's see. But let's see next how Hurlstone Park compares. So I pulled up the street view outside Hurlstone Park railway station. And the train tracks actually pass underneath this raised alcove here. They pass underneath the street. But let's explore the area around the station. So we can see here there doesn't seem to be any retail whatsoever. Seems to be mostly single family homes. Let's go the other way. There's one liquor store. a standalone liquor store. But we go this direction on Floss Street. We only see single family homes, well, some apartments, but no dense retail clusters, no dense real residential clusters either. There's only one small apartment complex. The rest here seems to be single family homes. So from the comparisons of Ashfield to Lewisham and Campsie to Hurlstone Park, we can see that stations receiving high patronage are located very, very close to very dense retail districts. In this video, we didn't get a chance to explore dense residential clusters, but we did note that the very busiest stations of the network are located around the largest business districts in the metropolitan area, namely the Sydney Central Business District, St. Leonard's, Chatswood, North Sydney, and Parramatta. But remember, in this video we've been using station entrances to measure patronage or ridership. But remember, there are other measures of ridership, and I kind of alluded to that in the beginning of this video. And one measure that's often used by transit systems is the number of passengers on the platform in any given day. So passengers may not exit or enter the station fare gates, but they may use the station to transfer between trains, so they'll be on the platform at some point in time. So these stations can have large volumes of passengers transferring at the stations and being present on the platforms without the station being in close proximity to dense clusters of residents, retail, or commerce. And to illustrate that, I'm going to show you one example of a major transfer station on the New Jersey Transit Commuter Rail Network. So here's a map of the New Jersey Transit Commuter Rail Network. And the station we're going to be focusing on is Secaucus Junction Station, shown here as Secaucus. And you can see that passengers traveling on the main line and the Pascack Valley line, and this branch of the main line called the Bergen line, are able to, well, note these two lines here travel in this direction and terminate at Hoboken Station. But passengers traveling along these lines are allowed to switch to trains moving to that ultimately terminate at New York Penn Station. So this station is quite important to the system. So here I've pulled up a street view of the Secaucus Junction Station in Secaucus, New Jersey. And you'll notice there's really not much development around the station. In fact, look at this, there's a bunch of open fields. And yet this station is one of the busiest, if not the busiest, station by number of passengers on the platforms in the New Jersey Transit train network. But it's one of the least busy when measured in terms of station entries or exits. And you can see there isn't much incentive to enter or exit the station here, as there's really no development around the area. And this is changing, but in its current state, you're not going to expect to have many people entering or exiting Secaucus Junction Station. But when measured in terms of number of passengers on the platform per day, it is one of the busiest, if not the busiest, station in the New Jersey Transit Commuter Rail Network. So that basically tells you that in order to be a successful transfer station, you needn't be located in close proximity of dense commercial, retail, or residential strips. However, based on what we saw with the Sydney Trains rail stations we examined, in order to have high ridership measured in terms of station entries or exits, you do need to be in very close proximity of either dense commercial, residential, or retail development. And this video mostly focused on the retail aspect, but we briefly touched on the commercial aspect. We did not get a chance to look into the residential aspect. Perhaps we'll get to that in a future video.